Welcome to our channel, where ordinary stories from everyday life suddenly turn into unbelievable battles, full of surprises, drama, and clipboards. Today, you're about to witness the showdown between a legendary retired sheriff and a self-proclaimed HOA queen who turned a peaceful neighborhood into a battleground of fake bylaws, hidden cameras, and classic Karen-style power games. If this story makes you laugh, gets you angry, and makes you wonder what on earth is going to happen next, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. And be sure to leave a comment. What would you do if Karen was your neighbor? That morning, the peaceful air of our hillside neighborhood was shattered by a shriek so loud it could have come from a crime scene. I had just stepped outside, steaming coffee mug in hand, when the scene before me made me freeze. Karen, the woman who had moved in across the street less than a year ago, was in full meltdown mode, flailing like she'd just caught a bank robbery in progress. She shoved her phone into my dad's face, Robert Hayes, and screamed, "He's hacking my Wi-Fi. He locked me out. Call the police." The thing is, my dad is the police. Or at least was. A retired county sheriff who solved hundreds of cases and became something of a living legend in our town. He didn't flinch, just calmly took a sip from his favorite mug, the one that reads, "Retired but still watching," and said, "Ma'am, I am the sheriff." Karen's face froze for a second, her eyes darting like her brain was trying to reboot reality. But in true Karen fashion, she called 911 anyway, reporting my dad for tampering with critical infrastructure and demanding criminal charges. 10 minutes later, a patrol car rolled up. Out stepped Jake, one of my dad's former trainees, now deputy investigator for the county. One look at the scene, Karen shrieking, Dad casually sipping coffee, and Jake burst out laughing. Karen tried to hand him her phone like it was evidence at a Senate hearing. "Ma'am," Jake asked, trying to stifle his grin, "do you know who that is?" She snapped, "A cyber criminal." Jake nearly choked on his own breath. "No, ma'am. That's Sheriff Hayes, the man who once led the task force that broke up an actual cybercrime ring." And there I stood, feeling like a side character in a dark comedy, just missing the background music. From one simple act, changing a Wi-Fi password, Karen had inflated the situation into a full-blown backyard version of a national security crisis. But what none of us realized at the time was that this was only the opening act. A storm of clipboards was gathering, and thunder was about to roll across our quiet little street. My name is Logan Hayes. After 4 years living in a cramped apartment surrounded by honking horns and the rushed chaos of city life, I decided to move back to my hometown, a quiet little place tucked at the base of the hills, where the main road still has just one traffic light and people greet each other with a simple nod. My plan was simple: work remotely with my freshly earned tech degree and spend time with my dad, who had just retired after 40 years as the county sheriff. Robert Hayes, my father, isn't the easiest man to get to know, but he's someone the entire town either respects or fears. He's known for never losing a case his entire career. Some say he could shoot the wings off a fly at 50 yards and then lecture it about trespassing. But really, all he wanted after retirement was two things: fish and coffee. Every morning at 5 a.m., he brews a strong black cup, sits out on the porch with our old dog buddy, and doesn't bother with the world, as long as the world doesn't bother him. We lived in an old wooden house, weathered but cozy, surrounded by tall pines and a dirt road that leads to a small fishing pond out back. The neighborhood was quiet. Not many people, but most were kind, until Karen moved in across the street. At first, I just thought she had a bit of a control freak vibe, especially when, during our first encounter, she didn't say hello. She said, "I'll be keeping an eye on things around here." That should have been the first red flag. But in a town where politeness is treated like an unwritten law, even a full-blown Karen can catch people off guard. And sadly, we underestimated the clipboard-wielding storm headed our way. If you've never encountered a true Karen, imagine a woman who always carries a clipboard, acts like a high-ranking official of an imaginary kingdom, and genuinely believes that authority can be printed straight from her home printer. That's Karen, our new neighbor, who managed to turn a peaceful neighborhood into the stage for a power game that only she was playing. Just a few weeks after moving in, Karen created her own fake HOA, a homeowners association, in name only, despite the fact that our neighborhood had never legally formed one. She printed community regulations on bright yellow paper, taped them to everyone's doors, and even issued handwritten violation notices in a slanted script that looked more like courtroom accusations than friendly reminders. Each notice came stamped with a custom seal, probably made using a toy stamp kit from an office supply store. Worse, she appointed herself president, proudly wearing a 3D printed gold badge that looked like it belonged in a cosplay convention. Her headquarters? A dilapidated backyard shed, painted white with a sign that read, Community Command Center. I swear, the one time I passed by, it still smelled like spray paint mixed with stale cookies. The first violation we received? Our mailbox tilted slightly to the left, which Karen claimed disrupted the overall aesthetic of the neighborhood. My dad just shrugged, straightened it, and let it go, thinking it was a harmless prank. But Karen didn't see it as a win. To her, being ignored was a challenge. His silence was interpreted not as dismissal, but as a provocation. Let's see what else you've got. And so, Karen's clipboard became a weapon of bureaucracy, wielded in a one-woman play where she wrote the script and cast herself as lead. She printed more rules, posted notices for mandatory meetings, and assigned authority to a compliance committee, which, of course, consisted solely of Karen. She didn't want order, she wanted control, and without even realizing it, we were now living in the kingdom of an unelected queen, where the crown was a clipboard and the throne was an old wooden chair in a tool shed. The tipping point wasn't a land dispute. It wasn't loud music or a barking dog. It was Wi-Fi, a simple router, a private internet signal. And just like that, our entire neighborhood was dragged into a full-blown tech war, fought with a clipboard. When I moved back in, my dad and I installed a private fiber optic internet connection, fast enough for me to work remotely and for him to binge-watch old westerns without buffering. To most people, that's just a personal choice. But to Karen, it was nothing short of a public act of rebellion. One afternoon, she knocked on our door to inform us she was setting up a community Wi-Fi for neighborhood security, with a router installed in her garage, and that all residents are required to connect to it for data synchronization. She made it sound like she was running air traffic control. We politely declined, clearly firmly, without drama. The next day, a young boy, probably Karen's son, walked up our driveway and asked for the Wi-Fi password. I kindly explained it was a private network and not shared. He sulked and left. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Less than an hour later, Karen stormed across the street like a thundercloud, pounding on our door and demanding we provide emergency access for community purposes. My dad, in full unbothered mode, took a slow sip of coffee and replied, "Ma'am, this is a private residence. You don't live here." It hit her like ice water to the face. Her cheeks flushed red, her eyes blazing like we'd just insulted her royal title. The next morning, my dad changed the Wi-Fi password, not out of fear, but because he thought it was hilarious. The new network name? Karen Stay Out. I nearly spit out my coffee laughing. Karen, however, did not take it as a joke. To her, this was a silent declaration of cyber warfare. Less than 24 hours later, the police were at our doorstep. Karen had filed a report claiming my dad was tampering with civil telecommunications infrastructure. What she didn't realize was that the man she just called the cops on, he was the one the entire department still called boss for over 40 years. One calm morning, I heard the well pump behind our house running longer than usual. With my dad's routine, everything was always under tight control. The amount of water used, the exact time for irrigation, even how he instructed Buddy not to trample the tomato rows. But that day, the pump just wouldn't stop. Something was off. I followed the pipeline, across the lawn, past the wooden fence, through a line of ivy growing along the trail. And then I saw it. A green garden hose, half buried under mulch, snaking across the boundary of our property, looping across the street, and ending in Karen's front yard. She had secretly tapped into our private well. No asking, no notice, not a shred of concern for privacy or legality. She was stealing water to feed her precious bed of yellow daisies, quietly, boldly, shamelessly. I could have stormed over and confronted her directly, but I was raised by a man who once negotiated with an armed hostage taker for 12 hours without leaving his chair. We don't believe in rage. We believe in justice and stench. I called a friend who's a plumber. Together, we rerouted the auxiliary line to a tank filled with gray water, non-toxic, but smelled like a mop left in the trunk of a car all July. Then we waited. The next morning, a blood-curdling scream echoed from across the street, shrill and piercing, like someone had just been doused with liquid dumpster juice. Karen stumbled into her yard, flung the hose down like it had betrayed her, and vanished behind her bushes. The stench rose like a fog, creeping past the hedges and all the way to our porch. Buddy barked once and took 3 steps back. The hose was gone by nightfall. No explanation, no apology, not even a passive-aggressive note. I thought that would be the end of it, that Karen, finally defeated, would retreat in silent bitterness. But I underestimated something crucial. To someone like Karen, defeat doesn't end the fight, it escalates it. I thought the garden hose incident would be the last straw, that after being blasted with her own personal stench storm, Karen would curl up like a hedgehog hit with a bucket of ice water. But no, for Karen, embarrassment isn't a cue to stop, it's fuel for retaliation. The next day, a new slip appeared on our door, another violation notice. The reason? Excessive porch lighting after 9 p.m., disrupting the local insect ecosystem. I had to read it 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. A week later came another one. Unfair Wi-Fi bandwidth usage affecting community equity. I looked at my dad. He just shrugged and carefully filed each notice into a red folder labeled Karen's Greatest Hits. But the nonsense didn't stop at paper. One morning, I stepped outside to grab the newspaper and found a bright orange warning sign zip-tied to our fence, reading, "Danger, aggressive dog." I froze. She was talking about Buddy, our 14-year-old Labrador who once got scared by a butterfly and ran headfirst into a tree. Now he was a public menace? Then came the wind chimes, a Christmas gift from my aunt, gently hanging from the porch, now labeled an unauthorized signal-emitting device. Karen claimed it was interfering with her newly installed security system. But the real kicker, her cameras weren't facing her own yard, they were aimed directly at ours. One of them pointed straight into my bedroom window. That was it, the final crack in my patience. I walked across the street and rang Karen's doorbell. She opened it with that familiar smug expression. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Unless your next violation notice includes the phrase criminal voyeurism, I suggest you turn those cameras around." She slammed the door before I could finish. I chuckled and walked away. What I didn't know was that Karen had just gone underground. What was coming next would make her fake violation slips look like child's play. When most people are harassed by a Karen, they usually choose one of 2 options: ignore it or move away. But my dad isn't most people. After 40 years in law enforcement, he knows that harassment is just the tip of the iceberg. The real danger always lies beneath. And Karen, with her clipboard and cameras pointed at our property, wasn't playing games. She was building something dangerous. Instead of arguing, my dad quietly began gathering evidence. No announcements, no debates. He simply bought a new USB drive, plugged it into his computer, and started saving everything. Every violation notice, every flyer taped to our door, every screenshot of her cameras aimed at our yard, all cataloged, labeled, and stored in a folder titled, simply, Karen. I once asked what he was doing. He handed me the thick file, smiled slightly, and said, "You think this is a civil nuisance, but I think we're heading into a legal battle." He wasn't kidding. While I was still fuming over Karen's petty antics, my dad was quietly building a case solid enough to stand in court. He had me pull the footage from the day she installed the surveillance camera facing my bedroom window. He logged every flyer she distributed, marked each with time, date, and her self-declared title, Community Command Center. Then one day, he opened his laptop, logged into the county's public system, and submitted 2 official requests. 1, a petition for an investigation into unauthorized HOA activity, and 2, a query for all complaints or code violation reports filed by Karen McMillan within the last 6 months. Karen thought she was running the game, but what she didn't realize was that my dad has never stepped into a fight without a plan. a strategy, and a fully loaded legal playbook. She thought she was dealing with a neighbor. In reality, she was going head-to-head with a retired sheriff, getting back into form. Notices were posted on every front door, stamped with a red seal, as if issued by some official government office. Emergency HOA board meeting, attendance mandatory. At the bottom, bold text declared, topic, enforcement measures against non-compliant residents. I almost laughed out loud, not at the message, but at the location. The so-called Community Command Center was none other than the old shed behind Karen's house, freshly painted in a peeling coat of white. My dad didn't say a word when he got the notice. He simply stood up, pulled an old button-up shirt from his closet, the one from his sheriff days, not to make a statement, just to remind everyone he hadn't forgotten how to end a game that went too far. He grabbed his usual mug, retired but still watching, and told me, "Let's go early." I want a front row seat. We were the first to arrive. The shed smelled of mildew and cheap cookies sitting on a dented tin tray. Folding chairs were squeezed together, no more than 10. But Karen walked in like she was addressing Congress. She wore sunglasses, despite it being dusk, and clutched a yellow folder like it held the fate of the free world. 4 neighbors followed her in, each looking increasingly unsure. One still had a gardening glove hanging from his pocket. Karen opened with a list of community order violations, and it was obvious she was targeting us. Unauthorized private network installation, provocative signage, excessive water usage, and my personal favorite, refusal to cooperate with the board. No one spoke. Every eye was on my dad, who calmly stirred his coffee. Then he stood up, reached into his folder, smaller but far more powerful than Karen's, and held up a single sheet of paper. An official investigation result from the county. He spoke slowly, each word cutting through the silence. There is no legally recognized HOA in this neighborhood, no charter, no authority to collect dues, no legal standing. The room fell completely silent. Karen froze, like she'd just been doused in ice water, and that was only the opening shot. As the final words left my dad's mouth, the room went so silent you could hear the wind chimes clinking softly outside. Karen didn't speak for several seconds. Maybe, for the first time, she realized that her clipboard wasn't a sword of power and that her 3D printed badge was no more than a toy from a kid's birthday party. But she wasn't backing down. She narrowed her eyes and growled, "I was granted authority by community consensus." A soft cough echoed from the back. Mr. Lewis, a retired teacher who usually kept to himself, suddenly spoke, "I gave you $50 for sidewalk repairs." "So, where'd that go?" No answer. Then Mrs. Chan, Karen's next-door neighbor, added, "What about the neighborhood patrol vests? Never seen anyone wear one." Doubt spread like wildfire through dry grass. Karen tried to regain control, pointing toward us. "They're a threat to order," she declared, but every word only tightened the trap she had set for herself. My dad sat back down, saying nothing more. He knew the room had shifted. This wasn't about words anymore. It was about truth. I stood up and pulled a USB drive from my pocket. This contains footage of the so-called community Wi-Fi router installed in Karen's attic, purchased using fee money no one knew about. Then I held up another document. And this is a list of over $2,000 collected from residents. No receipts, no records, no accountability. The air thickened. Karen shot to her feet, stammering. She threatened lawsuits, accused us of defamation, said she'd call the police. My dad simply shrugged and said, "Tell them to bring handcuffs. They might need them, for you." A neighbor whispered, "We've been scammed." Another said, "I want my money back." The silence exploded into a wave of anger. Karen turned and bolted from the shed like it had caught fire. The next morning, a crooked "for sale" sign stood in her front yard, wobbling in the breeze. No flowers, no goodbye, just a clipboard, a pile of torn-up flyers, and a neighborhood finally awake. When the "for sale" sign went up on Karen's front lawn, I thought to myself, so, it's really over. The whole neighborhood exhaled in relief. No more hastily taped violation slips, no more hidden cameras, no more impromptu HOA meetings inside a sagging wooden shed. But people like Karen don't disappear that easily. She didn't retreat. She waited. 3 days after the fateful meeting, I noticed something strange. Karen's car was still parked in the driveway every night, in the exact same spot, as if nothing had ever happened. Her curtains were always half drawn. The porch light flicked on at dusk like clockwork. Yet no one ever saw her come or go. Part of me wanted to believe it was just habit. But my dad, who'd cracked hundreds of cases in his career, just muttered, "The game's not over." A week later, we found our mailbox pried open before dawn, and every piece of mail, junk, bills, personal letters, gone. Dad checked the security footage. The image was grainy, but the neon pink sneakers in the frame were unmistakable. Karen's favorite shoes during her neighborhood patrols. Then came Mr. Ramos, a retired construction worker who woke up to find a puddle of red liquid splashed across his front step, right after he publicly spoke out against Karen at the meeting. Another neighbor received an anonymous letter accusing them of violating water usage laws, even though it had rained the entire week. We filed a police report and submitted a request for a restraining order. But this time, my dad did something more. He filed a formal petition for a full forensic audit of Karen's term as self-appointed HOA president. Every collected fee, every surveillance device purchased with community funds, the attic Wi-Fi router, it would all be reviewed. Karen thought she had lost a battle. But now, she was facing actual legal consequences. And though her silhouette had vanished behind the curtain, the shadow was still watching. At last, the legal bomb my father had quietly been building for weeks was finally triggered. One Tuesday morning, I saw him leave the house earlier than usual, wearing a crisp dress shirt, carrying 2 thick folders and his old leather briefcase, the one he used back when the cases were serious. When he returned, he said just one thing. "Karen's not a joke anymore. She's a case." That same day, the district legal office confirmed they had received a full file from the community, including a petition to shut down the fake HOA, a demand for the return of all unlawfully collected fees, and most importantly, video, financial, and eyewitness evidence proving that Karen had abused a non-existent organization for personal gain. 2 days later, an official notice was delivered to every home in the neighborhood. Karen's self-declared HOA was deemed illegitimate. All regulations she issued were legally void, and all fees collected were classified as unjust enrichment. The total? $4,721.45, including tech improvement fees, command center maintenance, and neighborhood watch funding. But that wasn't the end of it. The county legal office also filed a civil lawsuit with the district court, demanding that Karen repay every dollar and compensate for harassment and invasion of privacy. She had 30 days to pay up or face trial. That afternoon, a new "for sale" sign popped up on Karen's lawn, this time from a real estate agency. No pictures, no fancy listing. Just a small note at the bottom. Owner open to negotiation. Quick close preferred. 2 weeks later, Karen vanished. No goodbye, no explanation, no apology cookies. But she did leave one final message, in true Karen fashion. She dumped sand across the front lawn, destroyed the sprinkler system, and ripped out every single flower bed before she left. A bitter farewell, perfectly in character for someone who spent her time in this neighborhood tearing more down than she ever built. Ever since Karen left, it was like the neighborhood had been washed clean by a rainstorm after a long drought. The whispered warnings faded. The suspicious glances gave way to handshakes and genuine smiles. People started talking to each other again, not through violation slips taped to doors, but through simple questions like, "Want to grab a coffee?" or "Grill out tonight?" One neighbor replanted flowers where Karen had destroyed her garden. A new community Wi-Fi network went up, named Poetic Justice Net, with the password "Good Riddance." My dad became an advisor to the newly formed, and this time, legitimate, neighborhood council. There was a charter, there were elections, there was even a treasurer, but he didn't attend regularly. "I don't need power," he said. "I just want peace, and my morning coffee." I moved out too, into a small apartment a few blocks down, started a life of my own. But every Sunday morning, I'd drop by. Dad would be there, sitting on his old porch chair, Buddy lying at his feet, coffee in hand, and a quiet smile as I walked up. One week, I gave him a new mug. Sheriff of the suburbs. He chuckled and raised it like a toast. We thought it was over. But life has a sense of humor. That very afternoon, a white SUV rolled slowly into the driveway of what used to be Karen's house. New car, new plates. But one detail made my stomach tighten. The license plate frame read, "Proud HOA President." I glanced at my dad. He took a sip of coffee, eyes still locked on the vehicle. I asked, half joking, half nervous, "Round two?" He didn't answer right away, just smiled. That quiet, knowing smile I'd seen so many times before. The kind he gave just before a case began. "Let them try," he said. And I knew that summer might have been calm, but the fight for peace. It's never truly over. In a world that's becoming more connected, but also more complicated, the story of Robert Hayes and the self-proclaimed HOA Queen. Karen isn't just a bizarre neighborly feud, it's a mirror reflecting how we confront injustice, abuse of power, and absurdity in our everyday lives. The first lesson we learn is this: calmness is not weakness. While Karen applied pressure, issued threats, and orchestrated manipulative schemes, Mr. Hayes, with quiet resolve, strategic action, and unwavering patience, gradually turned the tide. He didn't shout, he didn't lash out. He gathered facts, trusted the law, and let justice speak louder than anger. In a world where rapid reaction is often mistaken for strength, Mr. Hayes reminds us that true strength lies in knowing when and how to act. The second lesson: never underestimate the power of a united community. Karen held control by making each person feel isolated, fearful, and powerless. But when Logan and his father stood up, presented evidence, and told the truth, those silent voices rose together, and together they took Karen down. It's a reminder that sometimes all it takes to stop something wrong is one person willing to say no. And finally, this story shows us that not everyone with a title has authority. Leadership is not handed out. It is earned through trust, transparency, and responsibility. Karen tried to manipulate others using a clipboard and fake rules, but her lack of legitimacy was her downfall. Whether in work, family, or community, power only has value when it's rooted in respect. You may never face a real-life Karen, but most of us have, at some point, felt helpless in the face of injustice, a false accusation, unfair control, or a rule no one agreed to. When that moment comes, remember this story. Don't stay silent when you hold the truth. Don't choose outrage when you have the law. And never forget, peace sometimes must be defended by quiet, steady courage. If you've ever lived near someone like Karen, someone who thinks a clipboard is a license to control others and hidden cameras are tools for community management, then you know exactly how we felt. That feeling of being watched in your own front yard, being cited for owning a sweet elderly dog, or threatened with a fine because your porch light was too bright. And if you've ever wished to see someone like Karen brought down, not with vengeance, but with truth and the law, then congratulations, you just watched it happen. Hit like if you've ever wanted to say, "That's enough, Karen." Subscribe to follow more real stories you wouldn't believe if they weren't true. Share this video with friends, family, or anyone who's had to put up with a Karen of their own, because sometimes the best way to reclaim peace is to let the whole world know what really happened. The story presented in this video is a work of fiction, inspired by common experiences and events that occur in residential neighborhoods. All characters, names, locations, and scenarios have been changed for the purpose of entertainment and to convey broader social messages. This video is not intended to target or defame any specific individual or organization. We do not encourage retaliation or unauthorized actions that interfere with the personal rights of others outside the bounds of the law. Any advice, opinions, or perspectives shared in the video are for illustrative purposes only and reflect the viewpoint of the storyteller within the context of the narrative. If you are experiencing issues in your neighborhood or place of residence, we strongly encourage you to contact the appropriate local authorities or seek professional legal counsel for lawful and proper assistance. Thank you for watching. We hope this story has offered meaningful insight, thoughtful reflection, and real-life value you can apply in your own experiences.